we're welcoming you all from various Zoom or Facebook to our session on a time of coronavirus and anxiety. And today we have with us three panelists, Sid Hamarusa, Sonia Patel, and Thao Lee.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Okay, so what I just wanted to kind of talk about first is just some of the data, kind of talking about like, the economic situation here in Hawaii specifically, and then how that's impacting, the rates of mental health and substance use across the nation too. So the first slide here, I just kind of have, like the change in jobs. The economy, especially here in Hawaii, has been significantly hit, right, with related to COVID, the drop in tourism. And so as you can see here, statewide compared to a year ago, we saw 105,000 less jobs. Okay, and so there was a study done that was posted on the CDC website. And so this was a study done in late June, and they surveyed about, I think it was about 5,000 US adults, and asking if they were struggling with mental health or substance use issues. And so about 31% of the respondents reported anxiety and depression symptoms, 26% reported trauma and just having stressor-related disorder symptoms. And then there also was an increase in started or increased substance use to 13% reported. And then 11% of people reported seriously considering suicide. And so, that was a significant increase. So compared to this time last year, there was only about 8% reporting anxiety symptoms, depression, only about 6% of people reporting some depression symptoms. And, you can see like a doubling of suicidal ideation as well. And then 1 in 10 reported that they started or increased their substance use because of COVID-19. I know I was working with a lot of patients that had, relapses as a result of COVID and some of the stress that they were going through as well. And so the interesting thing that the study also found was that younger adults, racial ethnic minorities, essential workers, unpaid adult caregivers reported just having a disproportionately higher rates of mental health issues, substance use issues, and elevated suicidal ideation. And so we can kind of think about it, right? Like, I know, talking with some people that were essential workers, some of them felt highly anxious and worried about having COVID. Some of them were also put in predicaments where they had to choose, right? Like, what am I, where am I going to sleep? Do I go home? Do I possibly expose my family to COVID-19 or that predicament of also having to pay and have a roof over their heads? So a lot of different stressors. Okay. And so when we can think about stress, right, in terms of the lockdown stress, we know that, the traditional Hanselian definition of stress is that it's the response of the body to any demand for change. And so we can think, right, about how many changes COVID-19 has required us to do. It's things like, wearing a mask. People didn't know about masks or not wearing it. And now we're all of a sudden having to be wearing one every single day. We talk about the closure of schools, right, which is an important safety network for our kids and our families. And then all of a sudden, a lot of family members are thrust into multiple roles of having to, not only try to provide for their family, but also having to be a teacher, and having to be, sometimes I talk with my patients sometimes too about, they juggle so many different hats, right, of being that disciplinarian, having to be the principal of the school, in certain respects. So a lot of different changes there as well. So unfortunately, right, like when there is sustained or chronic stress, which is definitely, what's going on with COVID, right? Like this started out back in March for many of us with some of the lockdowns and this ebbs and flows with the lockdowns and partial lockdowns. But when we have these chronic stress, it really affects us on a biological level. Okay, so we increase this level of a stress hormone called cortisol, and it also impacts these important neurotransmitters that really impact our mood, like serotonin and dopamine. And both of those neurotransmitters have been linked to depression and anxiety. And these chemicals also help regulate important drives in our body too. So they affect our sleep, our appetite, energy levels, and even how we express emotions too. The other thing that we were asked to talk about, right, is like COVID discipline too, and why is it so hard? And we know that change is hard, even just getting people to eat a little bit healthier and we know what we're supposed to be eating, and we know how much level of exercise that we should be getting. But a lot of us, of course, are not doing those things. And so any kind of change that we're asking people to do is just hard in and of itself. The other thing that I think we run into is just a culture here in America is this idea of like rugged individualism, right? So we highly value independence and our rights, that frontier mentality of America. And a lot of people perceive that, if we're requiring masks or requiring lockdowns, this loss of their individuality and this loss of independence. And so there's this natural kickback a lot of the times because of that. I also run into people that I talk to that they have, especially more so with men, but this fear of admitting fear. So a lot of them don't want to wear masks or follow maybe some of those protocols because they want to appear like they're fearing, getting COVID-19. And then the other thing that we also run into, right, is some of this confusion about the guidance too. Not to bring in too much politics right now, but when we have, the president of the United States refusing to wear a mask or, going to work, even though he's possibly still contagious, there's all this confusion, right, about some of the guidance, so naturally then some people will, if they're leaning one way or the other, they'll kind of look towards some of those leaders as examples and follow some of their examples as a result too. And, I also work with people that admit that just wearing masks is just very uncomfortable. And so there's also this level of apathy that goes on too, where maybe they're just not caring. And then the other thing, right, is, where we are social beings, us as human beings. So when we ask people to lock down and not socialize, especially here in Hawaii, right, where we, the value of ohana and being there with family is so important, it really makes it a lot more difficult at times. I know for myself, right, like when when the lockdown first happened and I was, saying hi to or happy birthday to my mom through the window, just dropping something off. It's just very hard to not go in and just do the normal thing, right? So again, right, it's just us as social beings, when you lose some of those connections, it just makes it a lot harder. And I think that's another big trigger for some of the anxiety and depression that we're going through too. Okay, so just briefly talking about like coping, big thing is to talk to someone, right? Like, rather than holding all of this in, being able to get that support. It could be from a friend, from a family member. It could be from certain other resources. Maybe it's like the crisis line. And if it really is, if you are feeling significantly overwhelmed too, get help. There's also a lot of services with like therapy, a lot of people moving into, of course, telehealth services, or even just going into to talk with your primary care physician or a psychiatrist about possible medications is another option too. And then, we always talk about this as well in my work with patients is, change what you can, right? Like, there's a lot that's going on with this pandemic that we don't have control over, but just trying to focus in on what you have to be able to control.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sid. And we'll next turn to Sonia.
Even before the pandemic, there was a shift in mental health among that Gen Z population. They're like age 5 to 24, and I usually work with the group right smack dab in the middle of that age range. And even before COVID, there was a shift towards worsening mental health, especially with college students. After COVID, so over the past 6 months, there was one study that said college students reported 91% increase in stress, 81% increase in sadness and loneliness, and more increased frequency of suicidal thoughts. And this was compared to a 2018 study. And, you know, one of the things about Gen Z, and I have kids who are Gen Z, so I see that the challenges of this is the historical events, you know, 9/11, school shootings, and they're highly concerned about issues such as climate change, police violence, systemic racism, things like that. So there's all of this that contributes to the shift, but also they're the first generation that's been immersed in the internet and exposure to social media, news constantly, 24/7, whether it's on their computer or their smartphones, which I call dumb phones, but I can't get rid of mine, unfortunately. So there's all of that that's happening. And I think after the pandemic and the lockdown, a lot of that's been worsened because you can't get rid of electronics all of a sudden. It's hard. Well, you can, but it's much harder. Now that kids are back in school, a lot of them are doing distance learning, so they're on the screens even more. And then some of the students tell me that even when they're online on their computer, they're still on their phone texting their friends or playing games. And so it's this strange thing that's happening to their brains. In terms of lockdown stress in general, I can't say enough, and I know Tao's going to talk about this, but the idea of being in the moment and to keep living. That's one of the things I'm working a lot with these, especially these teens on, is that it's really important that even though we're all in lockdown, we're still living, and really to focus on doing and being, not getting trapped in thinking and feeling, and learning to kind of separate ourselves from that is helpful. So even basic grounding techniques, when people really get into their heads, like identifying where you are, what you see out your window, you know, what's in your room, just basic things to bring you back in the moment. And in a way, I think if these teens can really get to that, they're going to be better off after this, because if you can learn to be in the moment, that is like the key. That is absolutely the key, I think, to mental health. Be in the moment, be present. And it's something that social media, that these teens are using all the time, and the internet prevents us from doing. So yes, that's something that I'm.
But Thao, we would love to hear what you have to present.
So I teach adolescent development course, and in my development course, I just completed, my students had to work in groups, and this is one group, they had to do an infographics, and this group chose purpose meaning around COVID-19. I just want to mention Chanel, Christopher, and Mia, they might be listening, so I want to, you know, kudos to them. They put together this wonderful infographics, and they did highlight that mental health is a problem for those who are 25 years and older, younger, right? This particular group, as well as many other groups, are being disproportionately affected by this whole situation. Those particularly without resources, and Sid mentioned rural families, rural communities, they are disproportionately affected in terms of resources that we have to deal with this. So disconnection, loneliness, and isolation, big deal, big deal. Why? Because we are inherently built to have connections. We are social beings, social creatures. So this goes against what we are naturally designed, right? We need that oxytocin. So if I can invite you, 3 gentle touch to your skin right now, right? Because we are being touch deprived. We're wearing masks, we see others as threat, we can't hug and touch with the other, right? And some cultures like, right? It's like, that's part of their culture right now, and Hawaiian culture too, right? We can't do honey anymore. So it is a big deal, right? So rather than activating that oxytocin, which is the tend to befriend to ourselves, to other, and to this experience, where it's like, oh no, you're a threat to me, I'm a threat to myself. So just taking a moment, right, to do that relaxation of touching yourself or petting a cat or a dog really enhances that oxytocin, right? Disconnection, they even said, well, here in this study, 7 out of 10 adolescents struggle with mental health, and they struggle with isolation and disconnection. Adults, even though you're in a group of family, you might feel still isolated and lonely. Just because you're with a group of people and you're a family member doesn't mean you don't have experience of loneliness. So this group said, well, what do? We stay connected, which is hugely important. Hobbies, and learn new things, right? We exercise. Now we say these things, but you say, well, you know, it's easier said than done. And you know why that is the case? Because when you have stress and cortisol that's operating, our windows of tolerance decreases and our option seems very limited. Yes, I know I should exercise. My doctors, I should flush, I should, floss, I should do hobbies, but yet I can't. And why is that? Because when we're under stress, that cortisol, that narrow of attention doesn't allow us to open up and to consider other possibility. So you're completely normal if you feel like you can't do these things because there's too much stress happening in the body right now. Okay, so what do we need to do? We need to, at least what I do, is understand that we have affordances. And part of what we see is, okay, what do you see in this bee? I mean, the flower. We see as a flower, as this beautiful, like a flower, right? Just a color. But the bee sees the flower differently. It sees it as an opportunity to get sugar and to make honey, right? This is on the right side with the white. This is how a bee sees. So our perception shapes everything. It shapes our ability, whether when we hear that, like, you should exercise, you should connect more. And you're like, well, you know what? I don't want to connect. Why? Because my stress is so high right now, right? These people are going to be threatening to me. Affordances. Our affordances are shaped by what happens in our body physiologically, what we've been conditioned in terms of our culture and our upbringing, like Sonia is talking about. What are the structures in the family that provides opportunity to provide other than being on social media, right? Because right now, all we feel like is all we have. The affordances we have is social media. That's the only thing I can think of because we have been giving other affordances. What can we do? Well, I say relationship is key, right? At 3 levels. To yourself. What is your relationship to your thoughts and to your emotions? You know, that annoying thought or that fearful thought that you don't want to have? What is your relationship to that? Because that leads to the problem when you go and do something else, because we can't be with that difficult emotions. One of the greatest skills that one develops in adolescents and young adults is the ability to be with distressful emotions. And we haven't learned how to do that because our society is a pleasure-seeking society. Right? And that phone that we have is designed that corroborates with our desire to have pleasure all the time. But you know what? Life is not pleasurable all the time. But now we've been wired to, like, every time you hear a ding, dopamine gets triggered. I do that text. So it makes absolutely sense right now why kids and adults are so much on the phone. Why? It goes right to the limbic system, that pleasure sensing. And if you have a parent that says, get off the phone, you are dealing with a very primitive system that says, no way, this is the only way I'm getting pleasure right now. So you take that away, I'm going to be an angry monster. I'm going to be that reptile, that Disconnection that says, how dare you take away my pleasure? That's what we're dealing with, right? So what is our relationship to yourself, to your feeling and thoughts? And who do you think you are? Because right in adolescent, emerging adults, it's all about identity right now. Who am I? How do I contribute? Which is why that purpose of meeting in my group, the other group in my class, makes a lot of sense. They're trying to figure out, who am I? And what is my purpose and meaning in my life? Which is hugely important. Relationship to others. If we don't have a good relationship with ourselves, very hard to have a relationship with others. If you're not kind to your thoughts and your emotions, to your own experiences, what do? We blame. We love to blame, right? If we can't be with ourselves, let me put that discomfort on other people, right? So how do we connect with other people? Particularly right now, when we're in a moment where we're not supposed to be connecting in a sort of in-person kind of way where we hold and hug. And then the last one is connection to the land. Why do I mention connect to the land? Well, one, because I'm in CTAR and that's really important. But two, food, right? Nature is hugely important as a form of well-being. Right? The more that we have well-being, the more that our immune system is going to be strengthened. Because the more that we have this capacity to develop ourselves in these 3 areas, the more that we have the strength, and I call it the mindfulness superpower strength, to be able to be with all the uncertainty and all the discomfort. And yes, that virus too. Because even if you've got, that experience, what is the sense of security? Right? Where does that security comes from? If you have a good relationship with yourself and others and with the land, I guarantee you, no matter what's going to happen, you're probably going to be, you're going to have that trust within and your connections with others that allows you to navigate through these very challenging times. Sadness and depression relates to the past. regrets, things that have already happened. So as Sonia alluded to, it's contentment in the present moment, right? Another cartoon, Calvin and Hobbes. Here I am happy, content. Wait, but not euphoric. So now I'm no longer happy, content. I'm unhappy. My day is ruined. I need to stop thinking while I'm ahead. Yes, stop thinking, but savor the moment, right? When you have these moments, don't think more. Savor the moment, right? Just like Calvin, or is it Hobbes? So self-care. Am I running out of time? Self-care. Feel your feelings. This is not about disregarding that. Yes, sadness is happening, anxiety is happening. Feel your feelings. Be present with the feeling. Just do not disregard it. Be honest, be open to it. Open your heart to these feelings, but strengthen the ability to do emotional self-regulation. That's why I did that children's book. How do you strengthen that emotional regulation to be? Build self-compassion, like, because we're highly self-critical right now. We're always, we love to critique ourselves. So how do you build self-compassion? Build a bit of self-distancing of yourself, right? So that you're not thoughts and your emotions are like this. There's a bit of self-distancing that we need. Cultivate appreciating gratitude and find purpose and meaning in your life. 2 things to remember. I got this recently. Take care of your thoughts when you're alone, and take care of your words when you're with other people. And that is a simple recipe. So some tips for parents and children and teens: share and discuss emotions, feelings openly, right? Focus on what can be done, right? Make manageable things that can be done. Let them know it's okay to ask for help. Plan safe activities to engage socially. Engage them in problem solving, right? And solutions. And of course, good sleeping habits, which is what Sonia and Sid mentioned.